So thanks for coming, guys. So yeah, Jason D'Souza from NAB. I am an emerging architect, and today Andy and I are going to share with you a little bit around how we're accelerating API engineering, and we'll tell you a little bit about us, our company, give you a chance to think about whether you want to work for us. We'll go into 6 different tips that we're implementing and kind of want to share for you guys to think about how you could accelerate how you build your APIs. And during that, we'll talk about some benefits and learnings that we've kind of come through. So I guess about us, for those of you that don't know, we're NAB. We're Australia's largest business bank. We have about 33,000 people now. We serve about 8 million customers in Australia and New Zealand and around the world. Yeah, so so my official title is Emerging Architect for Emerging Technologies. So Enterprise Architect for Emerging Technologies. I've been in NAB for a long time. Some would call me a lifer. Yeah, 15 years, and currently I'm serving as the owner of our engineering acceleration technologies in architecture. And in my spare time lately, I've been planting potatoes. So I've got a whole bunch of potatoes growing. Give me 2 or 3 months, and then come over for some chips. I'll hand it over to Andy. Tell us a bit about himself.
Thanks, Jace. So my name is Andrew Saunders. I've been about 5 years at NAB. My official title is Senior Architect for API Platforms, but essentially at NAB look after, as well as that platform, I also look after governance and our standards. I was going to have a picture of the Queen up here, but that didn't seem quite appropriate because of what's been going on, because I met her back in the 90s. But instead I thought maybe I'll just put up a nice picture of my dog. That's Sophie. So I'm obviously a lover of golden retrievers. Back to you, Jess.
So at NAB, we've got thousands of engineers, and they're all building and maintaining APIs every day. It's our bread and butter at the moment. And from an enterprise perspective, how do we ensure that they're good, well, even better, great APIs, yeah? And what can we do? I guess a lot of people here as well, you should ask yourself, what can you do to help your people and our people build them, fast, safe, and securely? So here's a couple of tips that Andy and I are going to run through today. So I'll run through the first 3, which will be, the first one is around having an in-the-source program. So for some of you guys might have it, so some of you guys might not. Give you some tips on how to get started and how to make it better. Number 2 will be around quick starting developers. What that means, around libraries and boilerplate code. Talk a little bit about advertising this stuff internally. After that, we'll switch tracks a bit to the governance side. Talk about API governance to the left, API standards, and what API education looks like. So, tip number 1 is have an in-source program. We've had one going for the last couple of years, and it's been going pretty good. We've had our up and downs, but it's been quite successful in kind of getting our guys going quicker and getting some good customer features out. So for those of you that don't know what in-source is, it's like an open source project, but within the confines of your company, yeah? So inner to your company. It's all around creating high quality software and utilizing your engineers as best as possible and not having several teams reinvent the wheel over and over again. It's about working together and collaboration. It's a real people thing. So at NAB, we have the following 4 ways of using this stuff, so our contribution models. So the first one is you can consume it, yeah? So our success has been mostly around tooling and services around your services. So if you do have a problem and you're looking to build something, why build it yourself? Go look through our in-source catalog, find what you need and use it, or fork it, right? Whatever you need. And while you're doing that, maybe you find some bugs. Hopefully, not many. But if you do, contribute some time, raise an issue, yeah? Log some bugs, add some complaints, and hopefully someone will come and fix it. But sometimes that bug will stop you from moving forward or a lack of a feature. So you can contribute some code, yeah? Put a pull request in. You've saved yourself some effort and you've delivered your feature, and you're giving that back to the crowd. And lastly is sometimes there's not a project that's there that you can use. So you might spin up a new one. You might have an idea and you're passionate about it. So create your own project, get it submitted to the inner source program, and you can influence the project direction, maybe pick up some friends along the way. So I wanted to go through kind of one of my biggest successes that's come out of this program. It's our API testing framework. So some of the guys, I don't know if they're in this room, Colin Dart and Dane D'Souza. Hey, put your hand up. Yeah, there we go. So this is their story. So a couple of years ago, they were building some APIs, as we do, and it was around some governance project, but they noticed that, well, they had a problem for themselves where they needed to automate some testing, and they noticed that around the teams that they were working with were kind of using Postman to do their testing. Then we just had a Postman discussion, which is good. And they were just having Postman collections and kind of sharing that around themselves. And it wasn't a consistent way of doing the stuff. And I thought, look, maybe we can kind of build a project and automate our stuff and share that with the community so that people can start doing this in a common way. And they built this framework where, we're an API design first community. So we design our APIs first. So why not use that API spec to kind of go and generate testing scripts and all that type of stuff, right? So I won't go into too much detail into that, but they created this framework where it sits on top of your Postman collections. It uses Newman to kind of automate the testing and whatnot. But the main thing here is kind of a people story in that, we got it into the inner source program, started to kind of share it with other teams. And, here we are 3-4 years later, and we've had so many different teams across different domains in the bank, kind of add new features. I think an interesting one is in our backend teams, we're mostly REST APIs, but our front-end teams use GraphQL. So they were like, wouldn't it be great if this supported GraphQL? And now, it's got full support for that. So, it's a good story, and I think I'm always happy to kind of see what those guys have done over the last couple of years. So good on you. So, for those of you that don't have an in-source program, how can you get started? So, we've got this. There's a little link down the bottom there from GitHub. GitHub's got some great kind of documentation on some things you can think about to get going, but and we use GitHub Enterprise at NAB to kind of manage this stuff. It helps us a lot to get it done a lot better. But the main things here to talk about are inner source means distributed ownership. So if you want to maintain strong projects and not just have something built and kind of run off course, it requires consistency and kind of discipline. So the code owner's file is kind of critical. And being clear on who's expected to review and pull the pull request and the issues and who's supposed to approve it, yeah? So having someone you can reach out to, avoiding that you submit a pull request that it's just sitting there for months, languishing all your good work, no one's using it. Use a README file, not only to explain what the project does and to set the boundaries, but as an enabler for self-servicing. You have your code owners, but you don't want to be harassed every day from people asking you how to use this stuff. Use the documentation for its, for its own good. And lastly, as your project scales, you'll have more and more people that want to use this stuff. So use those issue templates, those pull request templates. They'll save you just having the consistency of being able to kind of review the stuff and manage it. And then you can probably put some automation on top of that as well, so you can kind of scale up and get things done more efficiently. So consistency is king. I'll move over to tip number 2, quick starts and accelerators. So we had a bit of a program a couple of years ago called NEF, so it's our NAB engineering frameworks, and it's all about building consistent ways to build our applications, in microservices mostly, and we also have something similar in our micro front ends. But I wanted to talk to you about something that I've been focusing on the last year more than before, is around, as an architect, what I found was we have some great quick starts and accelerators to get a basic front end struct in a microservice Spring Boot application going, right? But all my design patterns, they weren't being implemented consistently the right way. So I was like, what can I do? How can I get these guys to implement it correctly? So, we're getting things going resiliently. We've got the logging done in a similar way so I can get consistent dashboards for operational staff to run. And this is what we came up with. So a bunch of libraries, and not just, using some Spring libraries out of the box, but building things that are specific for us on top of it. so that our guys don't have to kind of manage it and kind of think about it themselves. So that's been really good. For an example, something that we're kind of doing is around publishing Kafka events. So, using the transactional outbox pattern in a consistent way. It can get tricky, particularly for some of your junior engineers, to understand how to kind of get it all going together. So having a library that does it that's configurable, it saves them a lot of time. Template. So yeah, you can get a template, right? Like we've seen what we've done in the infrastructure space around, spinning up a 3-tier app or whatever. But taking it to the next level around application templates. So I had a look at all of the applications and the types of microservices we need to build in the next, say 12 to 18 months, working out what are the patterns and applications that we need to build. So one of the first ones we did was an operational data store. I think we've all built that, or we're going to eventually, and we've got plenty that we need to build as well. So having a template where the code's kind of well written and well versed, and having some of our best engineers and SREs across it to understand how's the best way to build the stuff and get it into production, so that a new team can come in, click a button, they've got all the source code ready to go with the infra. It saves people a lot of time. So it's all great if we build this stuff, but if it's not well documented with good tutorials, then you're only halfway there. So I would say that it's worth spending some effort on writing good technical documentation, like a lab style for people to follow along. And the key thing with that is don't do it once and then forget about it. You have to maintain it. You make a change, go make it part of your delivery process to make sure it's good and kind of up to date. And last thing is, on this one, is sometimes some of your code doesn't fit into a library or a template. You just need a code snippet, and that's fine. It's the same type of thing. Have a good place to put that stuff so people can use it. Tip number 3 from me will be around discovery. So we've built all this stuff. We've got our inner source projects. We've got our Quickstarts and accelerators and libraries and all that stuff. But if nobody knows about it, then it's as good as people use it. Yeah. So it's all about reuse, and so people need to know. So we spend a lot of time, put some actual effort into the stuff. Even if you want to put extra people on it, so that people can find it. It's all about self-service. So have it in your engineering portals, your documentation hubs, whatever you have. Make sure you put some effort so that people can find out and use this stuff. Have community practices where you share this information, hackathons so people can build stuff out of it. Really facilitate the knowledge sharing. So that's 3 tips from me. I'll hand it over to Andy. He can go into tip number 4.
Thanks, thank you, Jace. Right, so thanks to Jace, we now know what we can do to build our APIs faster using some of those libraries and quick starts and templates, which is great. But at NAB, we've got thousands of developers, as Jace was saying. We're building actually probably around about 50 to 100 APIs per month. In production at the moment, we've got about, I think about sort of 1,700, 1,800 or so APIs. So how do we make sure that all of those APIs are actually any good? Because we don't want to just deliver kind of poor, bad APIs into production. So this is where API design governance comes in. So I know it's post-lunch and everyone's feeling probably a little bit sleepy, but please bear with me. Don't go to sleep while I talk about governance. Because I think the reality is that if everyone knew what to do, we wouldn't need governance. But everybody doesn't know what to do. That's been what our experience and our observations are with at NAB. At NAB, instead of governance, we call it shaping. And when we call it shaping, we're really talking about what I would call lean governance. So just enough governance to make sure that we're doing not too much on the blocking side of things, but more on the shaping side of things, more on making sure that we're steering people in the right direction. What we often find is that engineers will get straight into specs and start writing specs, and that's probably kind of something which needs a little bit more careful thought and planning and thinking before we get there. One of the key things about our shaping is that we want to make sure it's done right up front before any kind of build has started happening. I'm sure we've all tried to intervene in a project just before it's gone live. And actually, I think we'd all agree it's probably an exercise in futility to try to do that. You have to do it right up front when we're still thinking about it. One of the things you have to do is think about what are you shaping for? So are you shaping towards really high quality, good APIs? Are you shaping towards really high reuse? Are you shaping towards, actually, we just need to integrate, which might be okay, but probably isn't. So at NAB, we're kind of shaping towards reuse, really good consumer-oriented APIs, and also safe and secure APIs. Where's my button? This is the tool that we use for our shaping. We call this, this is called the API Model Canvas. You may have seen or heard of this before. It was originally created by an organization called API Ops Cycles, who I know are no stranger to API Days. The lady that runs API Ops Cycles, I think, organizes conferences, does the same job that Saul does in Europe. This API Model Canvas is an awesome, in fact, I would go so far as to say a superb tool for upfront thinking and strategic planning around your APIs. NAB's taken this and tweaked it quite a lot. So if you look at the original version, it's quite different. But what we've tried to do is keep the kind of concept. And at the same time, we've tried to make it easy and fun to fill out. The original version of this is very much like a lean canvas, which some of you may have seen before, or a business model canvas. We want to make this easy and quick to fill out so that we can do our lean governance. And essentially, this is there to enable a conversation. On the right-hand side, in the kind of green and blue, we're talking about the consumer side of things or the demand side of things. So really, this is asking the questions of who, where, and also kind of what channels through. On the left-hand side, we're talking about the supply side of things, or the API producer side of things. And here we're talking about how, who's going to own it, who's going to deliver it, who's going to have architecture oversight of it, what resources is it going to interact with. And then right in the middle, we've got actually the really important part, which is what's the API called, and would you believe it's very hard to come up with API names that are good. I live and breathe this stuff. But also the value proposition. So what does this API actually do? Why do we want it? Should we build it? Do we have anything else that exists already that's the same or similar? And then also we have some taxonomy around this, around things like useful frameworks like jobs to be done and buy-in. As I said, we get teams to fill out this canvas early when they've really just started to conceive of an API. And then what we do is we consider that we have a conversation about that API model canvas. So this whole canvas is there to enable that conversation. But who's the conversation with? So the conversation is with a cross-functional group. We formed a cross-functional group at NAB of engineering, architecture, and also API product management. And what we do is we consider this canvas and we ask the right questions. And this canvas, interestingly enough, this canvas is actually version 2. It's just recently been rolled out. The first version of this was a lot simpler and a little bit more open. And we have a conversation. And probably the key thing to note is that what we're doing here is shaping rather than blocking. So we find that one of the things that I didn't mention earlier on, at NAB we have a very self-service autonomous platform. So teams are very autonomous in how they manage their APIs and deploy their APIs. But we still want to make sure that they're doing the right thing and they're steering NAB in the right direction. So this is to enable that simple upfront conversation. So the next tip, have API standards and enforce them. So having API standards is a little bit of a no-brainer. I don't think anybody in the room would disagree with this. They help you to establish consistency. They are integral to a consumer-oriented design approach and obviously leading to a more streamlined developer experience. I'm not going to tell you what standards to get because there are 100, probably thousands of blogs out there or organizations you go and talk to. In fact, probably a lot of the people in the room who could tell you just some good standards. The important thing is to have some standards, but also to enforce those standards. So at NAB, in our platform, which we have spoken about in previous talks at API Days, we've built adherence to those standards inside our tooling. So, and we've done this in really kind of mostly two places, the deployment side of things and the design side. So when you are designing your API or when you are deploying your API, you have to follow some of our standards. So if you try to build an API that is not compliant with our naming conventions, if you're doing it in the design tools, the linting will show you errors and you won't be able to save it. If you are trying to deploy an API that doesn't have security configuration, then the deployment pipeline won't allow you to do it. It'll stop it from happening. And also design approval. So we have a formal design approval around our API specs before they're allowed to progress into actually any kind of non-prod environment. So again, if you haven't got that design approval, then you won't have, you won't be able to deploy that API into production. And lastly, on this slide, have an owner. That's me in the case of NAB, but also evolve those API standards. So NABs have been built over, I think, around about 5 years. He started them. But they're always changing. Recently, we've had to add in some stuff around GraphQL. There's probably other things that are going to have to be added in. And also, as you go, we need to update and expand your tooling to support those same standards. Sixth tip is education. So it's all very well and fine to have API design governance, and it's all very fine and well to have standards, but Nirvana is where you actually don't need that governance. People are following the standards just naturally. They're designing good stuff just by themselves. And this is what I like to call, and I've not quite managed to make this stick at NAB yet, the path of least resistance. So if you think of water that needs to flow down a mountain and out to sea, if you let it do its own thing, it'll follow a twisty-turny path and you'll get a river. But if you build a canal, it'll follow a straight path right out to sea. And that's what I call the path of least resistance. So humans, they're kind of intrinsically built to follow that path of least resistance. And how do we make sure that at NAB, all of our engineers, those sort of 7,000 engineers that we have at NAB, how do we make sure that they're inherently doing this? Because like I said earlier, we're building a lot of APIs. It's hard to govern this stuff at scale. So we need to take a different approach to it as well. So this is where education comes in. So at NAB, we do things like we run regular API design boot camps where we talk through the standards and we talk around some of our basic principles around RESTful JSON, RESTful design. We have our API experts. Those are some of the same people that are sitting inside that API shaping governance team. We have them working directly with teams where necessary and shaping them more directly. We also do API spec reviews. So whenever there's a spec that is an important one, obviously there are some that are more important than others, we'll make sure that that spec is done to the best of its ability. And it's actually been really carefully thought out. We also run a community practice where we talk about some of the changes and things that are happening in the API space. And we also talk about some of the quick starts and libraries that Jason talked about earlier. And then lastly, we also share updates on social media at a mass scale. So how does this all come together? This is NAB's production line for creating great APIs. So what do? We use inner source. So we avoid reinventing the wheel and spread best practice around. We provide quick starts to help bootstrap our squads so that they can get productive quickly. We make it easy for our engineers to discover and use those artifacts. We have upfront early governance of API design before we started building, ideally before we started writing a spec, when the sunk cost is low or zero. We enforce our API standards in the platform, both at the design tooling stage of things and also throughout the deployment lifecycle itself too. And lastly, we educate our organization about what best practice is, what good looks like. And this allows NAB to deliver 50 to 100 APIs a month, fast, safe and secure, consistent, consumer-oriented, and hopefully reusable. That is pretty much the end of my talk. Jason and I would be quite happy to take any questions.
Yeah, we probably have time for maybe one quick question. One or two.
That design governance thing, are you doing that on like every new endpoint or just when there's like a new API to main resource, right?
It's mostly around a business resource. So, for example, we did one recently around account relationships. So relationships between, say, customer and all of the accounts, cards, services, that kind of thing. So we consider it at that. We don't go down to the level of endpoints. It's a bit detailed because we're trying to keep it quite strategic and high level. Good question.